my gosh, this book blew me away. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't expecting this. I've heard it's terrifying, and I'm all for that. Hi everyone, my name's Ebony. Welcome back to my channel. So if I sound sick, it's because I am. Unfortunately, I tested positive for COVID, so I'm staying in specific quarantine housing on campus to keep everybody safe, and so that is why I have a different background. It's probably a little echoey in here. I sound nasally, I don't have my ring light, so I'm using a window, I don't have my books. This video is going to be a little crazy, but I hope you all will bear with me. Today we are going to be talking about all the books I read in December. We're starting off with my bullet journal like always. So the first page we'll look at is my book stats page. And since December is last month, I can tell you the bottom statistics as well. So in December, I beat my record for the most amount of books read in a month. I read 25 books in December. I read 7,927 pages. I read 8 physical books, 17 audiobooks, and 3 rereads. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and give you my overall stats from the year. In total, throughout the year, I read 134 books, which is 4 more books than my goal. My goal was 130. I read 43,292 pages. I read 40 physical books, 94 audiobooks, and 7 rereads. And I think 40 physical books is wild because before I discovered audiobooks and I only physically read, I read about 30 to 35 books a year. So 40 is outstanding. I am very excited about that. Normally I would also show you my December wrap-up page, but I have not completed it yet because I did not print out my little books that I make my page with yet. I'm sorry about that. However, I do kind of want to do a video going over all of my bullet journal pages, from this specific bullet journal, because it's pretty much full. I have a couple of pages left that I want to do some end of the year things to. I've had it for about a year, so I feel like it would be cool to kind of do a wrap up of this, my first bullet journal ever. I do have a second bullet journal, a new one. I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited to show you guys. I will be doing a January plan with me bullet journaling video soon, so stay tuned for that as well, and you'll get to see the new journal. I'm so excited about it. Let's just jump into the books because we have a lot to talk about. I'm gonna scooch over a little bit so that there's space for the book cover because I don't have any books here to hold up. It's just gonna be more work for future Ebony when she's editing. Okay, so the first book I read in December is Some Things I Still Can't Tell You by Misha Collins. This is a poetry book by the actor who plays Castiel in Supernatural. He's of course in other movies and shows too, but that's mostly what I know him from, and that's why I was so excited to read this. I follow him on TikTok and he mentioned that he wrote a poetry book, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I ordered one from the store that I work at, and I read it immediately when I got the book. I talked about it some more in my book haul that I did recently, if you want to check that out. It was really good. It was kind of like the poetry that you write for yourself, you know, it wasn't earth-shattering poetry like I read for classes or anything, but it was still so fun and so cool to get to read something that Misha Collins wrote. And what I really enjoyed about it is it kind of gives you an inside look at his life a little bit, because a lot of the poems were, you know, autobiographical and about his career, his kids, his wife, all that jazz. So it was really interesting to see how he felt about specific things in his life as well. I did not give it a rating because I don't write poetry books, but I still really liked it. Then I read Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. If you don't know, I read Vicious in January of this year, so it kind of feels like I end-capped the year with the villains duology. I read Vicious in January. You can go check out my January wrap-up if you would like to. I freaking loved it. It was amazing, and I was so pumped to read Vengeful, and then I never got around to it. The biggest thing that held me back from reading it right away is because I read Vicious. I didn't read it physically. I read it on ebook, but I still read it physically with my eyes instead of listening to the audiobook. So I kind of felt like I wanted to do the exact same thing for Vengeful, but I just didn't have the energy or the time. So I ended up finally deciding to just pick it up on audio and read it that way. I still really enjoyed it. I didn't love it as much as I loved Vicious, and I don't know if that's because of the different format I was reading it in, or if that was just the way it was going to be. I still really liked it, so do not get me wrong. I gave it 4 stars. Basically, the plot of Vicious is it follows 2 characters. Their names are Eli and Victor. Oh, I love Victor. It's told in dual timelines, so one timeline is when they are going to college and the 2 of them are working on their thesis together, and they decide their thesis is going to be about EOs, or extraordinary people, basically people with like superpowers. They discover like how you can become an EO. And then the second timeline is 10 years later, after Victor has just gotten out of jail and he's dead set on killing Eli. And so you're kind of like, whoa, what changed? Like, why does he want to kill this guy who was once his best friend? One of the things I really loved about it is that it kind of blurs the line between good and evil like a lot. Also, the superpowers were super cool. There were some powers that I never would have even imagined, and some really cool things you can do with those powers. And I feel like, especially in Vengeful, the like envelope was really pushed on like the extremes of their powers. When I read Vicious, I wrote like a stream of consciousness long like review on Goodreads. I just wrote it in my notes app, but I copied and pasted it into Goodreads. It's like as I was reading it, I was like just jotting down what I was thinking. If you would like to read it, I think it's super funny, but don't read my review without reading the book because it's heckin' spoilery. I had a lot of questions about specifically the powers and like their limits and what they can do, and I feel like Vengeful really like delved into those questions and answered a lot of those for me. So I really enjoyed that it answered its own questions. Then I read another poetry book, I Hope This Finds You Well by Katie Bayer. This was just a book that we had at the bookstore. It was on the damaged shelf, and I grabbed it because I just enjoy reading poetry. But this poetry was interesting because it was essentially blackout poetry, or erasure poetry depending on how you look at it. But basically the author took either like hate comments from like her, I think she has like a blog or something. There was like a prologue at the beginning of it that kind of explained what was going on, but I think it was like a blog or something that she would post her poems onto, and she would take hate comments from that, or even just like, there were some political ones as well, so like maybe news stories that were like politically involved. And she would so like the one side of the page was the original text, and then the other side of the page was her like erasure of the text, which if you don't know what an erasure poem is, you basically just take out majority of the words until you're left with like a poem essentially that brings a new meaning to those original words. And if I had the book here, I would show you an example, but I do not, so you'll have to take my word for it. But it was very good. If I was rating poetry, I would give it a super high rating. I really enjoy erasure poetry, and I thought that there were some really interesting interpretations that she brought to the pieces that she was working on. I really enjoyed it. Then I read Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. This is a short story collection. I say read, I'm more like I finished it, because I read several of the short stories in this book at the beginning of the year for one of my classes. And then throughout the year I've kind of continued to read the rest of the short stories so I could like have read the entire book. It's a short story collection, so I can't like give you like a synopsis of it, but I will say my favorite story that I read was Babycakes, and you can actually find this online if you're interested. It's super short. It's like not even a page long. I don't want to tell you anything because I don't want to spoil it. It's super short, so I honestly just Google Babycakes by Neil Gaiman and see if you can find, I know you can find it online, and just read it. It's wild. I freaking love it. But the short story collection as a whole, I gave 3 stars. I didn't really know how to rate. I don't read a lot of short story collections, and I debated on not rating it like how I don't rate poetry, but I just rated it a neutral average rating because each of the short stories I had different feelings about. Speaking of books I read for class, I also finished The Book of Delights by Ross Gay. I was reading this for a different class that I took in the spring semester. Again, we read majority of the book, so it was a matter of just finishing the book. What's interesting about this one is that Ross Gay actually spoke to my class over Zoom, read from this specific book, and you know, did like a Q&A and everything like that. So I really enjoyed that, like it was like a whole new level getting to like hear him read his work, and it like, you know, it brings a whole new interpretation to what he wrote. By the way, the audiobook is also narrated by Ross Gay, so you could listen to the audiobook and listen to him that way if you would like. But basically this book is like a compilation of like journal entries that he wrote. I think the way that he did it was like every day he would write just a little bit about something that like delighted him. Of course, it's sort of autobiographical in a way because it's like his life, but also it kind of shows you to like find the good in your day. And I read I See London, I See France by Sarah Mlynowski. This is a YA travel book. Basically, the main character and her friend travel through Europe, and there's some flings and some dalliances and some drama. A lot of drama. It was a lot of fun. I did like it. It didn't like stand out in any way, but it was like enjoyable to read. Like, it was an enjoyable experience. But the journey, not the destination, you know? That's so fitting for a travel book to say that, but I gave it 4 stars. Then I read My Plain Jane by the Lady Janies, or Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. So these 3 authors write historical fictions, but like with a twist. So they've done, I think, 3 on Janes, and now they're working on Famous Marys. So this one specifically follows Jane Eyre. The twist is that she can see ghosts. So there's like a little bit of a mystery in there. I didn't really enjoy this that much, but I think the problem is that I haven't read the source material. I've never read Jane Eyre. I don't know a lot about that, or is it Charlotte Bronte who wrote that? I think that that was my problem, is that I didn't know the original story, so I didn't find like the satire in this. I didn't understand it, essentially. I did like the like seeing ghost plotline. That was kind of interesting, but it wasn't for me. I read a lot of historical fictions in December, and I discovered that historical fiction is not my favorite genre. Some of them I enjoy, but I think that genre might be like a hit or miss for me. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars. Then I read Tiny Pretty Things by Sona Chirapotra and Danielle Clayton. Basically, it follows several characters who go to a ballet school. It's like a really cutthroat environment, like competing against one another for like the lead roles, and just like the intensity that is ballet, which is something that I never like realized before. I thought this book was so good. I really liked the audiobook for this because I think there were 3 narrators for the 3 point of views that we got, and each of them all had like a very serious tone, which I felt was so perfect for what it was covering, because there was a lot of like really dramatic, really intense things that happened in this book. You know, like girls pitted against each other, doing things to hurt one another, essentially, both mentally and physically. Wow, it was a lot. I really enjoyed the drama in this book. I gave it 4 stars. Was really, really good, and I do plan on reading the sequel, which I think is Shiny Broken Pieces, so hopefully I'll get to that soon. Then I read From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon. This is my 2nd book by Sandhya Menon. I've also read When Dimple Met Rishi. This book is about the main character Twinkle, who's super into film, and she wants to be a director. That's like her passion, and she also has a really big crush on this guy at her school. I think it's his twin brother. Reaches out to her, essentially offers to help her on her movie, and so not only is she gonna like get to make her movie and like do her dream, but she's also gonna get closer to the guy she has a crush on. This book was okay. I wasn't blown away by it by any means. I didn't really care for Twinkle as a character. She was very self-involved and didn't really think too much about other people's feelings. She was kind of annoying, to be honest, as a main character. But overall, like, the little, like, romance plotline was cute, and I liked the idea of, like, living your dream. So I just gave it 3 stars. Then I read The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. This is another poetry book. I have read Princess Saves Herself in this one by Amanda Lovelace. So I just want to read more Amanda Lovelace in the future. So I started with this one. I don't have much to say about it. Do enjoy a good poetry book. I did not rate it, of course, because I don't give poetry books ratings. Next, I read Verity by Colleen Hoover. Oh my gosh, this book blew me away. So I technically started this book in like September, I think. I only read like a chapter or so when I started it in September, so for the most part, I read the entire book in a day. I think I read it all in a day. It was only like a 7-hour audiobook, so it wasn't that long. It was so wild. This book follows the main character, Lowen. She's an author, and she gets offered this deal to essentially ghostwrite for a very, very famous author named Verity Crawford, I believe was her last name. So she ends up taking the deal. Basically, Verity was injured so badly in a car accident to the point where she cannot function. She can't do anything by herself anymore, can't speak, can't move, or any of the things that you would need to do to be a writer. So of course they hire Lowen to ghostwrite and continue the series that Verity is so famous for. So Lowen moves into Verity's house, where Verity's husband and her son still live. She like moves into Verity's office and like is reading all of her notes about the stories to figure out like how to get into Verity's head and how to best write and do her job. While she's like looking through all of Verity's notes, she finds Verity's like autobiography essentially. She starts reading it, and Verity is not the person that you think she is. And I cannot say anything else because I will give too much away, but it's insane, it's wild, it's super suspenseful, and it's really thrillery. I just freaking loved it. You have to go read it. This is my first Colleen Hoover book, and I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't expecting this. And of course, I give it 5 stars. I cannot like rave about it more. Do be warned, this book is very, very, very R-rated. So definitely an 18+ audience for this one. And then I read They Went Left by Monica Hesse. This is another historical fiction. So it follows the main character, Zofia, and this is after the war has ended and she's been liberated from the concentration camps. And she's on a mission to find her brother Abek because they are the only 2 surviving members of their family, because they were sent right at the concentration camp, which is away from the gas chambers, and the rest of their family was sent left towards the gas chambers. It follows Zofia as she's trying to find her brother and her journey through that, essentially. Like I mentioned before, I've learned that historical fiction is not my favorite genre. I have also read The War Outside by Monica Hesse. I read it in November. I think I liked that one more, but I still enjoyed both of them, and they're still both important stories. I gave They Went Left 3 stars. A good book. It's just, I just don't think historical fiction is my thing. Then I read Last Sacrifice by Rochelle Mead. This is the last book in the Vampire Academy series. This was actually a reread for me. I've probably read this book like 4 or 5 times now, but my boyfriend and I have been reading this series for, I think we started in 2020. We finally finished the last book. He really enjoyed it. He was very excited about it. So I'm not going to tell you much because of course this is the last book in the series. Y'all know I love Vampire Academy, so. Then I read What Kind of Woman by Katie Baer. So this is that same author of I Hope This Finds You Well, that poetry collection. I read another poetry collection by her because I enjoyed that previous one so much. Unfortunately, I had to read this on audiobook, which I didn't know they had audiobooks for poetry books, but I guess some poetry books do. It wasn't erasure poetry like I Hope This Finds You Well was. It was just standard poetry essentially, but it was still really good. And of course this cover is like stunning. I freaking love this cover. No rating for that one, but still really liked it. And then I read You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. This is actually a non-fiction book. It's essentially like crazy stories about racism, and all the stories that are told are actually in Omaha, which is of course where I live. This book I have seen around a lot, mostly because I think we had an event with these 2 authors, like either it was before I started at the bookstore or maybe like soon after I started. So we have like a billion copies of these books on hand at any given moment. So I decided I might as well give it a read. It's local to me, and of course it's about a very important topic. This I read on audiobook, and it's narrated by Lacey and Amber. It basically is just Amber telling Lacey's stories about racist things that have happened to her. Even though it's like a very important topic and of course should be taken seriously, there are some really funny moments. Like just the authors themselves are just really, really funny. It was really interesting reading this, and I also really enjoyed the fact that it talks about a lot of places in Omaha, because like they were talking about places that I have been and that I have visited and that I go on a daily basis kind of thing. So yeah, that was really interesting, just having it like take place in my general vicinity, but also a really important read. I highly recommend. It was very good. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is essentially the book that the movie Coraline is based off of. I want to say that this is more of a novella than it is a book. I think the audiobook was like 4 hours. Basically, if you've seen the movie Coraline, you pretty much know the plot of this book. The movie followed the book really well, except that the movie added the character of YB. YB was not a character in this book, which I thought was an interesting addition. I don't think it was as enjoyable as the movie. I do also really want to read the graphic novel version of Coraline. I've heard it's terrifying, and I'm all for that. I gave this 3 stars. Then I read Just Breathe by Cami Govern. I didn't really know anything about this book at all when I picked it up. I have this alphabet challenge that I've been doing throughout the year, and I needed a J book for the end of the year. So this was a book that popped up on Libby as an audiobook, so I decided to pick it up. Basically, it follows a main character named David who has cystic fibrosis and spends a lot of time in the hospital. And there is also another character named Jamie who is like a volunteer at the hospital, and they become friends. So I feel like if you hear like cystic fibrosis or like cancer or like any of those like big illnesses, you kind of assume it's gonna be sad. So I did have that assumption going into it, and while it did have like sad moments, it didn't overall make me cry. So I was kind of bummed about that because I love when a book makes me cry. It's like my favorite thing ever. But it was still really good. I still enjoyed it. The characters themselves had some really interesting like facets, but I also enjoyed the relationship that they had. So I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Puddin by Julie Murphy. This is like the companion novel to Dumplin', which I read earlier this year. So it follows like 2 main characters who are like on opposite sides of the spectrum. One of the characters, Millie, her mom always sends her to fat camp every year, and she decides that this year she's not going, and she wants to pursue a like dream in reporting. And then there's also on the other side a character named Callie who is like the co-captain of the dance team, and that's like her entire life. They could not be more opposite. But then misguidedly, Callie and the dance team decide to vandalize a local business, and Callie takes the brunt of the fall for that. And so she gets kicked off the dance team, and she has to volunteer at the place that they vandalized, which is also where Millie works. So they kind of develop a friendship there. This is a companion novel because it does have the main characters from Dumpling. I think Willowdean was the main character in Dumpling, and she does appear in this book. I had kind of neutral feelings about this. I gave it 3 stars. I liked Millie's character and I liked what she was going for, but Callie's character, she essentially was the mean girl, and so when she got what was coming to her, I like didn't feel bad for her at all. I kind of was just annoyed by Callie's character. I know it's supposed to be like a story of like opposite sides coming together and like making a friendship, but I don't know, wasn't a super huge fan of that, specifically of Callie, I guess. Then I read Solitary by Travis Thrasher. This was a reread for me as well. I read this book also with my boyfriend Will. The protagonist Chris and his mom moved to Solitary. I think it's either North Carolina or South Carolina. I can't remember which one. But it's this like really small town where like everybody knows everybody, and there's some really sketchy things going on in this town. But Chris meets a beautiful girl named Jocelyn, immediately has a crush on her, but he finds out that there is some really, really dark things going on in this town, and Jocelyn is like mixed up in the middle of it. And this is a quartet. There are 4 books. I have read all of them. I read them in high school. But it's been a while, so I don't remember quite everything that happened. But I was reading it with Will, and of course this was Will's first time reading it, and he was hooked. He was like, what is going on? He was like, all of the things that are awesome when you're first reading a mysterious thrillery kind of book. It's not super thrillery in the way that like Verity is, because it's a YA book first of all, but still very intriguing and very good. So I knew I was gonna like this one already. I gave it 4 stars, no surprise for me. Then I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and this one pains me so much to not be able to hold up for you guys because I annotated this book. This was actually a reread for me. I read it for the first time I think in 2020, so I reread it this year, and I do have a vlog somewhere of me annotating it, so I'll link that if you're interested at all. But basically my friend Lacey and I, our birthdays are both in May, and so for our birthdays we like annotate a book that we enjoy and we like give it to the other person. For this, well, last year technically, I was reading Ninth House and she's reading Caraval. Unfortunately, both of us kind of fell into reading slumps before we could finish annotating. I've just finished Ninth House because I wanted to finish it before the end of the year, but of course I started it in like April. But she still has not finished Caraval yet, which is totally fine. Honestly, I think it was better the second time that I read it. Because Ninth House, if you don't know, is kind of, there's a lot going on. Basically it follows the main character named Alex who can see ghosts, essentially. They're called Greys in the book, but they're ghosts. But she's invited to come to Yale University and work for the secret societies that are within Yale. So she becomes the Dante of these secret societies, and she's learning all of this stuff about you know, rituals and prognostications and ghosts and magic and necromancy and like all the things. It's so awesome. I love all of the dark, it's very dark academia vibes, and I love all of it. So she's learning all of that from my freaking favorite character probably ever, Darlington. I freaking love Darlington. He is my boyfriend forever and always. But there's also like a murder mystery plotline going on because there was a girl who was found dead, so they're trying to figure out like who killed her. There's just a lot. There's a lot going on, so it's a lot to kind of take in, which I think is why, like, both times that I read this book, it took me several months to read it. So of course this time it took me, what, 6 months? And the first time I read it, it probably took about the same length. So there's a lot in this book, and it's a lot to like swallow. It's a lot to comprehend at times, but I think it is so worth it. Like, once you get a grasp on it, it's so good. Knowing me, I wouldn't normally like this kind of thing because it's not high fantasy by any means. It's definitely urban fantasy, but I don't typically like to have to learn a lot of things, but I like this one. This one is an exception. It's supposed to be a 5-book series. We still only have the first book, and I think it came out in October of 2019, so it's been a while since the first book came out. Like, Lee Bardugo, I need the next Ninth House book, please. Unpopular opinion, but I prefer Ninth House over any of the Grishaverse books. She keeps writing all these Grishaverse books when I want Ninth House. Hello. Really loved it, probably more than I read it the first time. Love that I annotated it. I gave it 5 stars. Then I read The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is another historical fiction, specifically World War II historical fiction. This follows the main character, Lael, who is sent to a concentration camp, but when he arrives there, the Nazis discover that he can do tattoos. So they make him tattoo all of the people that come into the concentration camp and like number them, essentially. But then there's a specific prisoner that like catches his eye. The story kind of kicks off from there. Like I said, I discovered I'm not the biggest fan of historical fiction. I gave this one 3 stars as well. It was good. Then I read Gallant by Victoria Schwab. I read it as an ARC. It comes out March 1st, I believe. One of my coworkers at the bookstore had an ARC, and she knew I loved Victoria Schwab, so she lent it to me, and I'm so grateful for her. This is the new V.E. Schwab book that's coming out this year, and I'm so excited for more people to read it because I want to hear more thoughts about it. But this is a YA book that follows a main character, I believe her name is Olivia, who lives at like an orphanage for girls, essentially. She's actually mute, so she signs ASL, which I thought was a really interesting representation. I've never read a book with a mute character, I don't think ever, let alone having it be the main character. I really appreciated that aspect. So she lives at this orphanage, and one day they get a letter from her uncle, and he says, you know, she has family that she didn't know about, and he wants her to come live with them on their manor, which is called Gallant. So she goes to Gallant, and there are lots and lots of mysteries about Gallant. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to say much, but it's super wild. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. But I had a couple of issues with it, which, to be fair, I read an ARC, so they are still like making changes to it. So for all I know, it might change a little bit by the time it comes out. Olivia starts at the orphanage, and then it feels like it takes a long time from the to get from the orphanage to Gallant, which is where like the meat of the story happens. So like, I don't know, I felt like that could have been done a little better, like maybe faster of her getting to Gallant. Like, I see the importance of the orphanage, but it just felt like it took too long. Like, by the time you get to Gallant, like, it just feels like it didn't matter, like, her time at the orphanage. There was some things about the meat of the story that I don't want to give anything away, but there were some things about it that I had questions about, and I didn't feel like it was necessarily like dived into as much as it could have been. To be fair, it is a YA book, so like it's gonna be like less intense than an adult book, but I don't know, I just had lots of questions and I wanted to know more. Those couple of things were what held me back from giving it 5 stars, but it was still super good, and I'm really excited for other people to read it. Then I read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne. This is another historical fiction. I know that this is a really popular one, and there's also like a movie about it, and I feel like it's the kind of book you read when you're in like elementary school or middle school, but I never read it. So I decided to give it a try. The main character, I think his name is Bruno. He's like 9, I think. His father, I think, is a general for the Nazis. They're staying near a concentration camp, I'm assuming. Nothing's really like explicitly said. A lot of it is like up to interpretation from the reader, which I actually really enjoyed about this. You know, like I wasn't spoon-fed anything, especially for a book that's sort of geared towards a younger audience, I feel. Bruno makes friends with the boy who's on the other side of the fence from him and who's in the concentration camp, and it's honestly like really heartbreaking. It was a really interesting book, and really interesting to see what World War II was like from the perspective of a little boy who didn't understand what was going on. I gave it 3 stars. It was really good. Then I read The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wong. This is a graphic novel, which, oh my gosh, it was so cute. It follows 2 characters. One is a dressmaker and one is a prince, as the title would suggest. The prince hires this dressmaker to make him dresses because, you know, he enjoys wearing dresses, but he doesn't want anybody to know, so he has like an alter ego like persona. He just like wears all these beautiful dresses that the dressmaker makes for him, and they have like a beautiful blooming relationship through that. It was super cute, and the graphic novel was really funny at times. I know there was a part that I just like burst out laughing, like it was so funny. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. The art style, the cuteness, this level, it was awesome. I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book I'm going to talk about, which is the last book I read in December, putting me at a total of 134 books in the entire year, which is 4 more books than my goal, so that's really exciting. The last book I read was The Vampire Academy, the Official Illustrated Movie Companion by Brandon T. Snyder. Again, I started this one earlier this year, but basically it's more of like a magazine than an actual book, but it does have a lot of text. It's just a lot of like behind the scenes things from the Vampire Academy movie, which of course y'all know I love Vampire Academy, so I felt like it was required for me to read. It was interesting like getting to know some things about like making that movie. Like they had like a linguist on hand who like made sure that they like pronounced everything correctly, but the movie guide was questionable at times. There was a part where it was like kind of explaining the like lore of Vampire Academy. It was so inexplicably wrong. Like, I'm like, did you even read the book? Did you watch the movie? Because I don't think you did. That's not how that works at all. It's like completely the opposite of that. I was like concerned, like who wrote this and who edited this, because this is not what happens in the book or how things work in the book. There was also a part where they essentially just spoiled the 5th book in the series. Like, you know, like you're gonna spoil the 5th book in the series in a movie companion for the 1st book. Like, come on. I was concerned about that, but overall still pretty enjoyable and cool, and I always think getting to know like the behind the scenes stuff in movies is interesting. So I gave it 3 stars. Interesting, but of course those specific things were concerning to me. Those are all the books I read in December and all of the rest of the books that I read in 2021. Stay tuned because soon I will be doing my top 10 best books and worst books that I read in 2021. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you read in December, what your favorite thing you read in December was. Have you read any of the books I talked about? Let me know down below. If you like this video, make sure you're subscribed down below so you don't miss any of my future content. And if you want to follow me on social media, all my links are in the description box as always. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!